Well, hi, good afternoon. It is Tuesday, and the time is 1:55 in the afternoon, and it is now the last lecture in Chapter 3, so this should be 3C, I believe, if I have that correct. So it will be the conclusion of chapter 3 okay. Okay, here we go. Also, I can no longer accept the study guide for chapter 2. So if you have not turned it in, don't turn it in because I can't accept it. And I've been keeping track, pretty good uh, contact on, or pretty good track of what you've already turned in. So we should be good to go. And I will be, as we get closer to the end of the semester, I will be putting hours in for you. Okay? Those extra credit hours. Now we finished up the last lecture talking about visual and tactile stimulation. And we talked about the connection between joint attending and bonding and vision, and the importance of the vision and it being good so that the child can see the mother's face, the father's face, the caregiver's face. We know that the ability to see 7.5 to 8 inches, mother's eyes are about 8 inches away. And what this does is allows the child to connect with mom. The child prefers faces of individuals, faces of people. They like the different angles and colors and the movement. They like the feel against mom's body. They want to smell mom's body. I just can't impress upon you enough how important this bonding is for an infant. Now, vision development is progressive. There's a maturation to it. Um, there are things to look for that might result in a red flag going up, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But at birth, we know that the child's vision is intact, hopefully, that they can see a few inches away. They're not actually tracking back and forth. You can move your head, but you can also just move your eyes. And so they're really not doing any tracking just yet. And it's a little premature for that. They can't easily distinguish between objects just yet. But within the first month, the eyes are starting to work together a bit better. Vision is getting stronger. There is some evidence of eye-hand coordination beginning to develop. Maybe just a little bit of they know something's there and they can judge a little bit of distance between the vision and their hands. They're starting to do some tracking. They can watch an object. You may put an object in front and you notice that they begin to do some visual tracking and they're beginning to reach. And theirs is that eye-hand coordination that we just talked about is when they're beginning to reach for objects. 2 months, the eyes will look crossed. They aren't well coordinated. The muscles aren't strong yet, but we don't want the eyes to turn in or out constantly or consistently. And they're beginning to move or follow the moving objects with their eyes. So the eyes are beginning to get stronger. 5 to 8 months, good color vision by 5 months. We've got the color. And we know that babies like color. They're attracted to color. And it is stimulating. Color is stimulating. Now remember, 6 months or so they're sitting. 8 months they're beginning to crawl, and this is going to help with the development of eye-hand coordination and reciprocal crawling and reciprocal walking. Early walkers who didn't crawl much may not, according to some research, may not learn to use their eyes together as well. And um, eye-hand coordination is important for learning. It's important for doing daily tasks as you reach for objects, as you pick things up. Um, I can't think of any other examples right off the top of my head, but it is an important skill. 9 to 12 months, they're pulling to stand, grasping objects with forefinger and thumb. We've got that pincer grasp. Picking up Cheerios off the tray and bringing them to their mouth. Cheerios. And anything else they can find on the floor. I caution you, caution you not to allow small things to remain on the floor because babies will pick it up and it goes right into their mouth. And you have no idea what might be down there. So be careful with that. We see them beginning to walk at around 12 months, and they may cruise the furniture for a while, but then pretty soon you'll see them taking that first step. Some vision problems in infants that you might observe or you might be aware of. Excessive tearing could be a blocked tear duct. Red or encrusted eyelids. If you've had pink eye or conjunctivitis, as it's also called, then you know what that crusty stuff is like. Constant eye turning, which again gets into the muscle control. Extreme sensitivity to light could be the result of elevated pressure in the eye. And appearance of a white pupil. Now let me tell you about my experience with that white pupil, because it is the presence, could be the presence of eye cancer. I worked with a woman several years ago, and she had a daughter that I knew, and this daughter had eye cancer, cancer of the eyeball, when she was very young, and both eyeballs were removed. And it started with a white dot noticed in the pupil. I believe it was in the pupil. And so this young woman is blind, she's bright, she went to public school, and then I think she may have gone to the Indiana School for the Blind. And I think that it was as an attempt to challenge her a little bit more academically, because she was very bright. Well, for some reason that didn't work out well. And she came back home, lived with her mom, and she had compensated very well for her lack of vision. Um, Language skills were good. Hearing was normal. Um, Not so sure she ever finished high school, and I think it was more a result of maybe not wanting to go, bad experiences, being bullied. Quite honestly, I don't know. Well, this young woman became involved with a young man, and uh, things didn't go so well. She got pregnant and had a baby. And she did have some difficulties during the pregnancy, but the baby was okay. And I was brought in to the home as the speech pathologist for the child due to the mother not being able to see and maybe not being able to provide enough language stimulation. And I knew the family, and I was just as happy to do that. And darling, darling, darling little girl. And so I am concerned at this point about every facet of this child's life, not just this child, but any child that I saw in First Steps. It's not just the language development or the cognitive ability or the environment or nutrition or health, overall general health, that helps to facilitate language development. It's not any one of those areas, it's all of them. And one of my favorite phrases or descriptions of going into a home, and I would go in weekly. So it's First Steps is a little bit invasive because you're going into somebody's home, and so and um, that can be you're invading their space, so to speak. And some families don't want you there. They think you're an extension of Child Protective Services, which I was not. They think they have to keep their house a certain way, or I'll call Child Protective Services. I will not. However, I would call under certain circumstances. But after a while, you build rapport with these families, and things seem to go well. But if I went into someone's home and they didn't have heat and it's 20 degrees outside and snowing, do I think they care about language development and stimulation? No. What they care about is how am I going to get heat in my home for me and my family? And so lots of different facets play into an environment in which a child can grow up learning language, using language to the best of their ability. So I would then call the case manager and do whatever I could do at that moment to help that family. But sometimes priorities just change and priorities are different. So I was in the home, and the home wasn't real neat. I won't say that it was dirty, but it was disorganized and messy that this mother can't see. And so the boyfriend would be in the home sometimes, and sometimes not. Sometimes he would be incarcerated, sometimes not. So I didn't have a problem with him. I would try and explain to him what I was doing. And lo and behold, he was physically abusive. And so I think he did go to jail for a while. And so the young woman moved in with her mother, I believe. So they told me that they had been going back down to Riley and taking the little child to Riley because they were monitoring the vision. Nothing had shown up. Everything seemed to be fine. Mother had this genetic cancer, eye cancer, so they were really watching the child very closely. So they had been down there. Lo and behold, nothing was going on. In the meantime, the mother and the boyfriend were not getting along. He had gotten out of jail, and they went out to the Muncie Mall, and he left her there with no phone. This mother can't see. He can't see. She can't see, and he left her there. And I think the child was with the grandmother. I don't know what she did to get help, but she's bright and resourceful and got help. And then the young man became more physically abusive, and um, it was bad. So he's now in prison. But the family kept the family rallied around, and they kept watching this little girl. And sure enough, the white dot spot appeared in the pupil. So the little girl was also dealing with eye cancer. Now, I don't know what happened to them because she aged out of first steps, but that is something that the grandmother watched very carefully. And actually, she's the one that caught it. She had been down to Riley. There had been no sign. The grandmother's watching this very carefully, and she did see it. So we know that genetically predisposed conditions do exist, and that is something that families do look for. And certainly this grandmother was very proactive. And actually, I'm not really sure what has happened to any of them. We know that the infant who does not gaze at the mother's face and seems to turn away or isn't reinforced, mother's talking to the infant and the infant doesn't change their expression, they're just not interested, they're at a disadvantage for not bonding, and bonding is extremely, extremely important. Current research at the University of Denver is focused on creating a computer model of a gaze pattern to use as an assessment for early detection of autism when the child is 6 months of age. And there's a lot of research now out in the literature about eye gaze with young babies and the baby's interest in faces and reaction and response to faces. We see that in the literature quite a bit. And we know that children who are on the spectrum are more interested in objects than they are people or faces, and they enjoy looking at objects more often and would gravitate towards the object. In fact, on the case history that we have in the clinic, one of the questions is, does your child seem to be more interested in objects than in people? Sometimes it's not just one characteristic that tells me or makes me suspicious of the child being on the spectrum. It's a combination of things that we put together. As children mature, the visual system matures, the tactile system matures, and this is how the child is gaining information. Early on, things go in their mouth, they want to feel it, see it, touch it, smell it, and this is how they're learning. They're naturally curious. They want to manipulate objects. They're experimenting with how something works, taking something apart, putting something back together, and beginning to learn how to solve problems. Children are also, when we talk about auditory perception, and there's that perception again that goes along with language cognition, and they're particularly fond of human voices. In fact, they prefer the human voice, and they can pick out mother's voice. They can localize sound. You produce a sound behind them to the right, and they can turn to the right. You produce a sound behind them to the left, they will localize to the left. Sound localization. Also, if you observe in a child that they've been able to do these things, and then one day you notice they're not, then that's probably cause to maybe give the doctor a call and see if they have an ear infection, wax, or if maybe they need a hearing test. But changing in behavior for a young child, an infant who can't raise their hand to a stimulus tone or tell you that they can't hear, watch for those changes in behavior. Newborns can also make gross discriminations about the loudness of sounds, and we also look for a startle reflex. Somebody closes the door, somebody claps their hands and close to them, and we look for this startle reflex. I just saw something on the news, or I'm not sure where, that dogs prefer faces of other dogs. Now, if you're a dog lover, and I'm a dog lover, I love my little Addie Bug. Um, I go home and she's so excited to see me, and I pick her up and she's licking my face and she's just gazing into my eyes. Well, she would prefer the dog next door than to look at that dog than to look at me. She just hasn't seen me for a while. So I thought that was interesting. Dogs prefer dog faces and babies prefer human faces. I think it's funny. Um, uh, let's see. Some of this I may just skip. The period between 16 and 19 months is especially critical for word learning. You've heard me talk about this explosion of language at about the age of 2. And remember, part of this is because at the age of 2, children are beginning to string words together. Want cookie, go bye-bye, daddy come, car go, baby high, whatever, and it explodes so quickly, so rapidly that you can't even keep up with it. The child only needs to be exposed to a new word once before learning has taken place. Children and adults use both hearing and vision to determine speech sounds. So when you're speaking to someone, and let's say you're having a difficult time hearing everything that they're saying, there's maybe noise in the environment, maybe you've had a cold and your ears are plugged up, I guarantee you're watching their faces intently and you're listening and watching the mouth move, watching, potentially trying to read their lips. But we do the best job of comprehending when we can use both the auditory sensory system and the visual sensory system. We experience better understanding when we're able to see someone's face. Have you ever, sometimes at home, I'm sitting on the back porch, 4 o'clock in the morning, I'm drinking my coffee, and Addie's out there with me all snuggled up, and all of a sudden I hear a sound. And I might even close my eyes and turn my ear to where I think the sound is coming from to try and heighten that sense and identify that sound. And sometimes we'll do that even with vision. I'll squint my eyes if I'm trying to really zero in on something. So the best opportunities that we have to really learn to read someone's face and to hear someone's sounds is to use both of those sensory systems. We know also in a classroom, a multisensory approach to learning is the best. The child who is able, let me give you this example. I think this is the example I used in class. I know this young woman, and she's maybe in her 40s, and she has had some major health issues along the way and has had a stroke, and she is fairly cognitively intact, but she has difficulty producing multisyllabic words. And if you remember from Broca and Wernicke, Wernicke is in the temporal lobe, and you use the temporal lobe and Wernicke for comprehension and sentence formation. And then messages go to Broca's area, and that is where we get into more of the motor movement. And so wherever the damage was done, there was some damage done in Broca's area. And also some cranial nerve damage because the tongue doesn't move as fluidly as it did prior to. And the lips don't work quite as fluidly. But her overall deficits are mild, given everything that this woman has been through. And so when she's reading, when she's speaking, If she had the word Stephanie, that would be a word difficult for her to produce. Stephanie. Stephanie. And what she might do is on the table, she might go, Stephanie. She might tap it out, Stephanie. She would want the clinician to say the word, and she would be watching her face very intently, Stephanie. And she might even tap it on her lips. She might clap it out. So we're using a multisensory approach with her to help facilitate improved intelligibility. And also there's rate. Now, if she talks too fast, then that's going to make that intelligibility go down a little bit, and she likes to chew gum. So chewing gum with someone who has some oral motor problems probably isn't the best thing, but she's an adult. She can choose to do that if she wants. But she really does do a nice job with a multisensory approach. Let's talk a little bit about executive function. The control processes in the brain that allow us to maintain attention, inhibit irrelevant associations, and use working memory. Frontal lobe, lobe. Remember, temporal, frontal, parietal, occipital. It controls the processes in the brain that allows us to maintain attention, inhibit irrelevant associations, blurting out irrelevant information, and use working memory. It's a slow process. Frontal lobe, executive function development is slow, and it takes place over time. It involves motor control, cognitive control, and social emotional control. Now, when executive function works poorly, when we don't have good executive function, children are negatively affected socially and academically. And we use our inner language to help us manage the executive function. I say I have two guardian angels. One sits here. Well, I should do it this way because, yeah, it looks like it's on my right side. My good one sits here, and then the naughty one sits here. And the good one says, "Oh, Patty, don't do that. Oh, don't do that. It's probably not going to turn out right. It's not going to be a good decision." And the other one says, "Go for it, do it. It'll be more fun." And so they're having this battle back and forth. The executive function is the process that helps me make the decision to stay on the straight and narrow. Executive function. It keeps us on task. It helps us to remember, oh, I have a project due. I've got to write that down. I have a test coming up. I have to write that down. I have a doctor appointment. Oh, I better make a note of that so I can get to the doctor's and keep my appointment. It helps to keep us organized. But language disorders really cut into the ability to maintain good executive function. They just do not work together. Attention and memory, well, to be successful at learning, language, anything, we have to have attention and memory. And it develops gradually also, that maturation process. We have controlled attention and we have working memory. Controlled attention is the capacity to maintain, hold relevant information, especially when you have external distractors. You're able to stay controlled regardless of what's going on around you. You can maintain your attention. And, I think that's hard. It's hard for me. I am auditorily distracted. And if I have a lot of noise around me, I struggle with getting my work done, to stay on task. I probably take twice as long to do something sometimes than what it would really take if I would just be able to control that attention and get rid of those distractors. Working memory is a system for storing, managing the information so that you can carry out complex cognitive, cognitive tasks such as learning, reasoning, and comprehension. Working memory, we can encode, process, and retrieve information. Working memory is just what it is. Information that you have stored in the schemata that you can bring forth and use later on to work through a problem, a task, a project. It develops as a child matures. If you have um, poor performance, you probably have poor controlled attention and poor working memory for sure. We know that what can help kids along the way is what happens in preschool, where they have short little activities and they have routine and consistency. Consistency, structure, and routine equals predictability. One of my very favorite phrases. I love it. Um, but that's what helps this child be able to focus because they can't focus for very long. So short activities, several activities, several times a day. We know that children who are living in a bilingual home, that they have good cognitive plasticity and flexibility. And what they're doing is this working memory, this controlled attention. They have one language over here, and they're listening to a parent or a family member speak in Spanish. And they're holding this Spanish or this English or whatever they're choosing to use to speak. They're holding it over here. So it's sort of suspended. It's on the back burner getting ready to be active. And in the presence of competing information, that is extremely hard to do. And they seem to be able to do that. Both languages remain active during language processing, thus requiring the language user to hold the relevant language in mind while inhibiting the non-relevant language. And that's why these kids seem to be a bit ahead in cognitive plasticity and flexibility because they've been doing this for a long, long time. Theory of mind, um, it's dealing with beliefs and emotions and likes and perceptions and intentions. And I think it helps with being able to be tolerant of other people, be flexible with other people, be able to look at differences and accept differences as being okay just because somebody else believes differently than you do, that it's okay. Now, of course, if it's life threatening, it's not okay. But theory of mind helps us to get along with people and be kind to each other. The development of executive function and language have been associated with theory of mind. And I think some of that is due to uh, problem solving or experiences or an increase in vocabulary, being able to communicate with others a bit better. There is some evidence that bilingual speakers do have advanced theory of mind. Um, an example of theory of mind, and sometimes we talk about theory of mind in relationship to our kiddos who are on the spectrum and they do have some difficulty in these areas. But I knew this young man who he was on the spectrum. He had a diagnosis of Asperger's, and I was having a conversation with him, and he was telling me how much he liked Jim Carrey. And he said, "Oh, isn't he great?" And I said, "Well, he's okay. I'm not a real big Jim Carrey fan." "What do you mean? What do you mean? You're not a big Jim Carrey fan. He's the best comedian. He's really funny, and everybody loves his movies." And he starts naming off all these movies. And I say, "Well, I just kind of think they're silly." And he's just not somebody that I really care for. I think there are other comedians that I like a little bit better. And I began to name another comedian or another actor, and he was not having it. He was angry with me. He was becoming frustrated and upset that I could not get on board with his thought process. It was almost egocentric, and I didn't waver. I didn't just agree to be agreeing. I just stood my ground and said, "But it's okay. It's okay if we agree to disagree." But he did not like it. He certainly wanted me to be on board. Could not could not even fathom uh, my dislike. Um, I do believe that we may be stopping there. I've got just a couple bullets on the next page, right above chapter 4. And I think that that's about it. Um, we will start chapter 4. This is Tuesday. This lecture is for Wednesday. Probably my lecture for Friday is the one that will start chapter 4. And there was something I was going to mention, and I just forgot it, but it must not be very important. So, that's the end of chapter 3, and we will begin chapter 4 on Friday. See you all later. Bye.